This video is sponsored by nobody, because I'm not a successful YouTuber yet.
It's okay, he just wanted his machete back!
By the time of the early 90s, the slasher genre was in a stark decline. Freddy was dead by 1991, Jason went to hell in 1993, and Michael Myers limped off the screen in 1995 with the most abhorrent entry in a once proud franchise with The Curse of Michael Myers, which was Halloween 6. As these horror icons either died, became entombed, or simply slinked away, the slasher genre went through a new trend. Something more self-referential, fourth wall breaking, postmodern, self-aware, and just a plain parody of itself. Wes Craven tested these waters with New Nightmare, where, 10 years after the original Elm Street, Freddy was back, but on the movie set of a new Nightmare film, and this film was a new film about the making of a new Nightmare film. It's straightforward yet confusing at the same time. The film was well received but ultimately flawed in its third act execution, but it was a nice change from the worsening series and heaps better than whatever the hell Freddy's Dead was. This meta take on the character and franchise, which both critiqued and celebrated the franchise with Easter eggs, jokes, and an idea that was fiercely original, was Craven dipping his toes in the water for Scream, which, in 1996, brought a film which was filled with film references, cliches, and people talking about cliches and film references which were in the film they were in, about the genre of film they were in. Kevin Williamson, who also wrote the underwhelming Hot Ticket, would go on to write I Know What You Did Last Summer, which, despite its flaws, was enjoyable and contained the hottest young actors and actresses of the predicted future of that time. Scream and its sequels all but nailed the coffin shut on the slasher, so, as we end up watching I Know What You Did Last Summer, counting the cliches and not really being scared at a horror film which eschewed the comedy of Scream, the genre stood on the crippled knees of its once proud legs. In 1998, Halloween H2O appeared in cinemas and, with input from Hill and Carpenter, gained respectable notoriety for the return of Jamie Lee Curtis and the alleged final film of Michael Myers as, already by the end of the decade and century, there was little excitement for just another retread of the previous films. Halloween would stay buried until Busta Rhymes went toe-to-toe with Mr. Myers in the abysmal Halloween Resurrection, which, apart from retconning and undercutting H2O, killed Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode and proved that bringing characters back from the dead for no good reason, other than cheap box office, was now a pointless endeavour. Also in 1998, however, was the release of Bride of Chucky. The Child's Play films had also deteriorated, and after the UK controversy of Child's Play 3, which had been cited as a major factor in the murder of Jamie Bolger by the media, Chucky was also on the scrap heap. Bride of Chucky, however, was a renaissance and embodied the postmodern, fourth-wall winks and self-referential success from New Nightmare and Scream, whilst also using the nostalgia of H2O to build a new brand. The mangled body of Chucky was retrieved from an evidence locker, which also contained Krueger's glove and Voorhees' mask, amongst other things, and brought back to life by his girlfriend from when he was alive as Charles Lee Ray, Tiffany. Tiffany was played with gratuitous glee by the amazing Jennifer Tilly, throwing in references from films such as Hellraiser, or discussions about the best way to kill someone, stabbing them, or turning it up a notch and literally smashing a glass ceiling and letting the shards kill two horny lovebirds. Bride of Chucky lent heavily on humour. Also, after the dolls even having sex in the most bizarre scene ever imagined in a horror film, Tiffany gave birth to a living doll at the end after Chucky swearing he always comes back, but dying is such a bitch. The meta would continue in that franchise and go even further in the 2004 sequel Seed of Chucky, where the real-life movie about the doll's killing spree is interrupted by the doll from the film, which is now in real life. Regardless of the convoluted story, Seed of Chucky was just awful. Anyway, before Freddy vs. Jason in 2003, which would resurrect the pair for a mashup of self-referential franchise nostalgia and brilliant odes to the cliches of Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street, we got Jason X in 2001. It's a long-running joke in film franchises that, when the idea runs out, you just go into space. That's what Jason X did, and did it with a wink and a smile, knowing how ridiculous it was, but enjoyed itself doing it. Anyway, quick recap. Jason has been captured and is to be transported by the military for experiments on his ability to regenerate. Lexa Doig from the TV show Andromeda isn't happy about this, and, true to her pessimism, Jason kills the soldiers and David Cronenberg in a small cameo before being frozen in cryostasis. When he is finally found, by a spaceship carrying the most gorgeous crew of scantily clad young astronauts ever, Earth is a barren wasteland and we head off to a new planet with frozen Jason and Lexa Doig, whose character is called Rowan in the film. Jason wakes up and then kills his way through the crew until a cyborg called KM, a sex bot with attitude, kills him with really big guns. Still with me on all this craziness? Okay. Jason is fixed up by nanobots and becomes Super Voorhees and goes about killing the rest of the crew, now completely unstoppable. Eventually, after distracting him with holographic campers, replete with weed, beer and bouncing boobs, we explore a little bit about Jason's sexual frustration as he ignores the remainder of the crew and kills the campers by banging them against a tree. Anyway, the ship blows up and, although Jason survives, he is pushed into the new planet's atmosphere and burns up before landing in a lake not far from some more very frisky campers. Finally, we see his burned mass sink to the bottom of the lake with the and we are left where we are always left at the end of every slasher film. The villain stopped, but probably not for long, and surely he will return. Of course, he didn't return, and there was, sadly, no Jason 11. Or Jason XI, whichever you prefer. Technically, Jason X happens after Freddy vs. Jason, even though it comes before it, because Freddy vs. Jason happens on Earth when Jason is still in hell, but it doesn't really matter, really. It's not a major problem. Whilst Freddy vs. Jason was a success, Jason X wasn't. It had been sat on the shelves for many years and released to little aplomb and gained little notoriety. I remember watching it at home after renting it from Blockbuster, a sentence which makes me feel old, but falling in love with its general stupidity. You see, by this point, slasher films were dead and buried, and the icons who ruled the 80s were just Halloween costume and jokes of a bygone decade. You could never seriously reboot Friday the 13th, so, by jumping the shark and saying, what about Jason Voorhees, but in space, the studio was able to churn out something which mocked itself but also played by the rules of a slasher film. Jason's kills were also inventive as, after drowning someone in liquid nitrogen, he heads to a video game room and gets confused over who is real after slicing a man's head off, but really the avatar of that person. Anyway, the crew realise what they are up against, the military grunts are sent after Voorhees, but get predictably killed like any military grunts in films who don't know what they're dealing with. There are some nice gags, such as Jason wanting his old-fashioned machete back amidst the rampage of the ship, to the usual death after coitus and, as mentioned before, pot-smoking teens with boobs who just rattle his chain for some reason. Introducing KM as the sex bot and the nano-machines who bring Jason back to life adds some originality to a film which plays along with its tongue in its cheek. These are plot relevant as, when we meet KM and her fake nipples fall off, we understand why she is so super strong and pragmatic, whilst Jason sends everyone else into panic. The nanobots which fix Lexa Doig also bring Jason back to life and serve as a plot contrivance where the odds are even more stacked against our protagonist, and Jason goes from being an unstoppable Terminator to a literal Terminator. The film does little to pretend it's anything other than a spoof of its former self set in space, with the writers and directors pushing their budget to get Jason in a video game, floating through space, hunted by space marines, and distracted in a fake Camp Crystal Lake. It was also Kane Hodder's last outing as Jason, as he was replaced by Ken Kirsinger in Freddy vs. Jason. Hodder plays Voorhees with the deep breathing, hulking aggression and brutish antagonism that was the very reason he was dropped for a more zombified and slow-moving Voorhees in Freddy vs. Jason. Horror and comedy seldom work. It's hard to scare someone and create narrative tension when undercutting your momentum with winks and gags. Horror is suspense and terror, comedy is relaxation and laughs. However, as Jason X doesn't even pretend to be frightening, the gags fall right as our disposable crew have no idea what to do with the undead hockey goalie. So, after Jason took Manhattan, then went to hell, he went to space and ended up on a new planet of hot young kids who were no doubt promiscuous pot smokers. Sadly, we'll never know what he did there, as it pretty much ended the franchise rather than revived it. Times were changing and everything was going dark and gritty again. Even when Jason was revived for the underwhelming 2009 Platinum Dunes version, It was all in the shadow of Batman Begins, where everything had to go back to dark, realistic, and gritty. Like the failed Elm Street remake, it trod the same ground as the original, brought nothing new to the table, and was carrying the baggage of a monster who just wasn't scary anymore. No amount of blood, tits, or ass, or machetes was going to change that. Jason X had some fun and came at a time when slashers were already mocking themselves. If you haven't watched it already, then get some drinks and pizza in and watch it with some friends. Enjoy its stupidity and see how, when you take an icon in a new direction, you can really have some fun. As for what's next for Mr. Voorhees, we don't know. There are legal rights issues and all sorts of problems before we get another film. Still, after the success of the 2018 Halloween film, the time could be right for the renaissance of these icons. Halloween wisely threw away all the other films but the original and, better than remaking the film again, sold itself on closure and the final showdown between Strode and Myers. That has since been extended to 2 more films in Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, I am aware, but the initial intention was one last stab. Friday the 13th has a slightly different story to fangle out, but a direct zombified Jason after the events of the first film is possible. Anyway, what do you think? Have you seen Jason X? Did you enjoy it? Do we need to revive these slasher icons? Anyway, until next time, I'll catch you later.